Hey there, welcome to the next lesson in my course on creating 5-year financial models in Excel. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you can find links to them in the description below. And if you want to download the Excel files and follow along, you can do so on the first link in the description below. Now let's get back to Excel. In the last section, we finished our Rockcode acquisition model and we implemented a way for us to switch between a pro forma view and a date of acquisition view. In this section, let's start to build our summary views, because for the acquisitions pipeline, we're going to need some average values from our core business. So now is a good time to start building the summary view of our core business. To do that, first, we're going to need a config. So let me just insert a new tab here. Let's apply some formatting. So this is going to be our config. Worksheet name is going to be config. And my company name is Minty. Apply the style. Let me zoom in a bit so it's easier to see. Let's change that 1000. Then I'm actually going to go here and grab the same top format that we have. I'm just going to paste it over here. I want to have my model items, which are all the different tabs that I have created and that I will create in the future. The idea is that I want to be able to, in a single place, come in here and just be able to switch them on and off. So we have Minty Holding, which is our corporate tab. We have Minty Dev. We have Minty Pipeline. Have Minty Solids. We have our Rockcode acquisition. And that's everything we have so far. First, let me make those appear in the same way, our format that we have all across the file. And what I want to have here is I want to have a really visual way. I'm going to use calculation formatting, but I'm just going to move it back to Arial and to size 8 as all the rest of my text. And here I want to have a drop down, and I'm going to go to data validation. And from the settings, I'm going to pick a list. And my source, just going to type it in here, on, off, hit enter. And now I can select between on and off. Let me format that to the right, and I'm just going to copy it and paste it everywhere. So the idea here is that if I don't want to include my acquisition, I can just turn it off. I could turn it off for all periods or just for some of them. And that way it won't get pulled into any of the calculations. This requires a bit more work when you're setting up the summary calculations, but overall it provides for a much easier experience when you want to try out different scenarios of including different things within your model. Now that we have our config tab, let's just make it gray. We can start building one of our summary views. I'll grab any model and just create a copy of it and rename it to core business. This is going to be my core business view, and my core business would only include my 3 existing revenue generating entities. So those are entities that operate on their own, and if I decide to pitch just the core business, I wouldn't need all the corporate overheads, the new product, the acquisitions, and so on and so forth. Just need those 3. So I want to be able to show only these 3 entities as the solid foundation on top of which I'll be building the rest of my business. All we need here is the 3 statements. So we can just go ahead and delete everything else. Okay, everything here broke, but that's okay. Let's just make sure everything here is black. And everything up here is also black. We need to sum our 3 core entities, which are Minty Dev, Minty Pipeline, and Minty Solids. And the way we're going to do that is for each of those, we're going to check if it's on or off in the config tab. So we're going to say if, go to the config tab, select Minty Dev. If it's on for 20, and because you're going to be copying the formula down, I'm going to press F4 twice to only fix the row. So if this is equal to on, then go to Minty Dev and give me the revenue for 2020. Otherwise, give me 0. Then I'm going to say plus if, I'm going to go back to config, if 2020 for Minty pipeline, and again, I'm going to fix only the row so I can copy it over to the side and it would pick the respective on or off for the respective year. If this is equal to on, give me the Minty pipeline revenue for 2020. Otherwise, give me 0. Plus, if Minty solid for 2022, again, fixed only on the row, is equal to on, then give me Minty solid's revenue for 2020. Otherwise, give me 0. This would go ahead and sum those 3 tabs, the revenue for 2020, based off of whether this is on or off here. So if let's say if I switch Minty Dev off, you can see that now our core business dropped significantly because Minty Dev generates the most revenue. Let's switch that back to on. And now the way we set this formula, we can just copy it over to the side, Control R. Then we can copy this whole row and start pasting it on top of all the non-sum formulas. And you see here that we have some issue, but let's just finish pasting everything, and everything is bold for some reason. So let's just unbold this, copy it again, paste it everywhere. Assets, liabilities and equity, cash flows. Okay, and let's fix this ref up here. And the reason for that is that if you remember, we copied the corporate tab and it didn't have revenue to base the expenses. So we made total operating expenses our growth assumption. So all we need to do is grab this and copy it over to the side. And now we have a reconciling balance sheet and the cash flow statement, and everything looks perfect. This now portrays our total core business based on our config for each of the 3 entities. Now that we have that for our core business, we can grab some average assumptions for the core business and apply them in our acquisitions pipeline. Now let's start working on our acquisitions pipeline. I'm going to start from the core business view because the model would look too different and it would be quite hard to repurpose one of those. We might get some bits and pieces from one of them, but just going to start with this one where we have the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement in our regular format, and we're just going to start adding assumptions at the top. Go ahead, right click, move for copy, create a copy, and just put it right before the config tab and call it acquisitions pipeline. That's kind of long. Prefer to have short name, so I see more tabs. So ACQ pipeline, and here let's have acquisitions pipeline, and it's just been Minty. So what we need here is first, let's get rid of all these formulas that are linking to other tabs. And for the opening cash balance, just gonna make it link to the previous year closing cash balance and copy that over to the side. So now we can go up here and add a bunch of space, and we'll start building different parts of our 3 statements and linking them as we go. First, let's start with our ownership assumptions. Let me add a heading over here. There's going to be assumptions. And the first one is going to be our ownership assumptions. Let's make that a header. Orange. So the first thing we want to figure out is, are we going to do any partial ownerships, or are we only doing like 100% acquisitions? No matter what we end up doing, I always want to have this option. So I just say percentage of partial ownerships, and then we'll have ownership percentage. And here we'll have two assumptions. Gonna highlight and make them blue, bold them, make them percentage, and those will be 25% and 50%. What this means is that for 25% of the acquisitions we make, in terms of number of acquisitions, we'll only acquire 50%. And we can play with that later on based on our understanding at where the industry is heading, or based on our historical experience with what types of acquisitions we did. But it's just a nice little thing to have that would add just a little bit of complexity to our calculations, but it would make our model much more versatile. Next thing, let's link the years here and fix the row only. Copy that to the side, bold it, and let me just grab this. Here we'll have our next assumption, which is the new acquisitions, the number of new acquisitions that we'll be making each year, and our number of total acquisitions. This is all going to be bold. And our new acquisitions, since we're starting from 23, I'll make those assumptions. And then I'll have the total acquisitions at the bottom. So let's say we're making 2, 2, 2, 3, and 4 acquisitions. That's our plan, how many companies we want to acquire. Our total will be the previous plus the new acquisitions in this period. Copy it over to the side. So we'll start with 2 acquisitions this year, and over the whole 5-year period, we'll be acquiring 13 companies. The next thing we want to think about in terms of assumptions is some kind of like a benchmark average annual revenue for those companies that we're acquiring. Average annual revenue. An assumption here would be, let's say we're acquiring usually companies around 50 million, or let's say that the average in the industry is about 50 million in revenue. And now that we have those assumptions, we can start building a waterfall table that would show us how much revenue are we generating each year. We're going to have the acquired companies here. The reason we want to do that is we want to have a waterfall that shows how many companies are in their first year with us, in their second year with us, within each year, so that then we can apply some growth to this revenue that they'll achieve by being part of our group. It sounds a bit more complicated like that, but you just build it together and you see that it's quite simple. So you need 5 years. I usually maybe go like 6 or 7 just to have like options to add more years here on the side. What we want here is, let's just separate this off. We'll have a bottom border here, and on the row below, we'll have a top border. So when we copy down, we don't mess with it. So in 23, we'll have 2 companies that are in year 1, and we won't have any companies in the other. We can copy that to the side. Each year, the new acquisitions are the number of companies in year 1 with us. What we can do from there is, so those 2 companies will be in their year 2 in 24. They'll be in their year 3 in 25, and so on and so forth. And we can actually just copy that everywhere because it always links to the one that's to the left and to the top. And this shows us a waterfall of how many companies we have within each year, which then allows us to have different revenues applied to them. So I'm going to grab the whole thing, including this line here, because I want the border. And I'm just going to paste it over here. And this is going to be my revenue growth. I want a growth percentage, which is by how much revenue will grow, and I'll align it to the right. And I want the revenue with the growth applied. So my growth percentage will be an input as a percentage, and I'll have, let's say, have it at 7.5%, bold it. Obviously no growth in year 1. My revenue for the companies in year 1 will be my average annual revenue. If from then on, it's going to be the previous revenue multiplied by 1 plus my growth. We can bring it all the way to the bottom. And what this means is that if I have a company that's in year 2, instead of 50 million, the revenue is going to be 53 million. And you probably noticed that I have a 7.5% growth here compared to the 5% that I have across the core business. This can either be the same at 5%, or you can be a bit more aggressive, especially if you're targeting specific businesses that are, let's say, more lean, better management, and so on and so forth. So let's leave it at 7.5. And remember, the whole purpose is that at the end, you can go through all the assumptions once again with someone from management or based on your knowledge of the industry and fine-tune them to get to a better result. We don't need those here. And now let's start calculating our revenue. It's a fairly simple formula. So we want the companies that are in year 1 multiplied by the revenue in year 1. And what we want to do is we want to grab this revenue and fix only the column by pressing F4 3 times. That way, when we move it to the side, it would still remain linked to here, but if we move it down, it would move down with the formula. Now that we have this, we can just copy it over to the side and copy it down, and let's check it. So in 2025, the companies that are in year 3 are going to generate 115 million. And companies in year 3 are the 2 companies that we acquired in each year. And in year 3, each company is generating 57 million, which for the 2 companies is 115. That's how this works. Now that we have this waterfall, we can have our total revenue calculated. This is the result we're looking for, and it's going to be equal to this sum. And now that we have our revenue, we can go ahead and link it in our income statement. Now let's go ahead and figure out the cost of sales. What I usually do on the expense line items is I'll have a common size calculation. You can just use the config tab, create a copy of it, put it right here, call it common size. And let me get rid of those. What we want to have here is cost of sales assumptions. We have cost of sales. And just make this a bit bigger, and it's going to be a percentage of revenue as we usually do in the rest of our model. All we want to do here is we're going to grab our core business as a common size assumption. So we're assuming that those companies will be running them similar to our core business. They're in similar industry. So we can almost safely assume that they're going to be working at pretty much the same expense ratios. Go to core business, and this is going to be our cost of sales divided over our revenue. Format that as a percentage. And because it's externally linking, I'm going to color it green. Just easier to find things that link to other tabs. And that's it. Now we can use this average percentage across our core business to calculate the cost of sales estimate for our acquisitions pipeline. So down here, we can grab a header. This cost of sales assumptions, cost of sales, common size, cost of sales, and gross profit. Okay, we want those 2 to be bold, and we want them both to have borders on top and bottom. Now let's link our cost of sales common size. I'm gonna format it as a percentage, and I'm also gonna make it green. Copy that over to the side. And here we can calculate our cost of sales, which is going to be our revenue multiplied by our average cost of sales percentage. And this allows us to calculate our gross profit, which is revenue minus cost of sales. Let me just switch the formatting here because this is the more important part. Now that we have our cost of sales and gross profit, let's link them down here. Cost of sales and our gross profit is calculated and it matches what we have up here. We can then move on to calculating our EBITDA. Again, we'll have a waterfall that would show us what our percentage of EBITDA would be for each company in each subsequent year after they join our group. Just have 5 for those, or you can again do 7 if you want. Let's bold that, make it bottom border, add a top border up here, and I'm actually just gonna leave it at 5, just keep it a bit more concise because this is gonna be quite a long tab. Here we'll have EBITDA percentage, and this is gonna be an assumption. Once again, you can grab that from industry averages or from comparisons with what your companies are doing. Let's say here I want those to be like 20%, and in year 2 we're gonna improve again, and then it's gonna be pretty much flat at 25%. We wanna calculate this and just gonna use the revenue up here. It's gonna be equal to our revenue for the specific year and the specific year in which the company is, multiplied by our EBITDA percentage, and we want this to move both on the row and down the column, but we want this to be fixed only to this column. So press F4 3 times and fix it. You can then copy it over to the side and copy it down, and we can then calculate our total EBITDA. Just format it, and it's gonna equal the sum of those. Now let's move back up the income statement and figure out our operating expenses. So let me just grab one of those headers, put it over here, and this is gonna be my calculate operating expenses. And I'm gonna add prior to transaction costs here because we'll be adding transaction costs for all the acquisitions, and those would go into our operating expenses, but they'll be on top of what we're adding here. This would all make a lot more sense in just a little bit. So let's go ahead. We have our gross profit and our EBITDA, and just gonna link them here so they're in the same place. And we wanna calculate our operating expenses. Again, this is gonna be prior to transaction costs. We bold the whole thing. So we have our gross profit right here, and we have our EBITDA right here. And basically the operating expenses are what takes us from gross profit to EBITDA. So it's just gonna be the difference between the two. And then we can copy that over to the side, and that's our total operating expenses. Similarly to what we did with corporate tab, we'll use our total operating expenses and we'll proportionally spread them over our expense line items. But in the corporate tab, we had historical data, and here we don't. So we're gonna go to our common size tab and just calculate the same common sizes for our expense line items as we did for cost of sales. Gonna paste all those here, just indent them a bit. Gonna grab this whole header, put it over here, and just say operating expenses assumptions. And you see I didn't fix this here. I'm gonna add a $sign, copy it to the side. Just wanna make sure that my ears are correct. What we wanna do here is let's first use the Format Painter, and then this is gonna be our salaries and benefits as percentage of operating expenses. Not out of revenue, because we want to follow the same approach where we try for a specific EBITDA number and then build up from that all the way up to gross profit with our operating expenses. So this is gonna equal our core business salaries and benefits divided over the total operating expenses for the same year. I forgot to fix the total operating expenses. This one, which is E26, is gonna go into the formula and just fix the row E26 with the $sign. So now I can copy this to the side, but also copy it down, and the references would still be valid. If I did it correctly, all those should be 100% and the row 100%. Okay, perfect. Now we can use that, and we can actually, let's add a check just to make sure that the row 100%. Okay, this is the sum of those. Yep, the row 100%. And now we can use those to calculate our expenses within our acquisition pipeline. So we'll just have our operating, actually, let me grab another header. This will be our operating expenses assumptions. And I'm gonna need a few more lines here. Let's just grab them from here, paste them here, indent them a bit, and I'm just gonna link from my common size, just gonna link the percentages here. This is, once again, gonna be colored green because it's linking to another sheet, and I can just copy it over to the side and copy it down. And I got the percentages here. What we can do now is calculate our expenses. So our salaries and benefits will be equal to our salaries and benefits percentage. And I'm not gonna fix anything here because I wanna be able to move it on both sides. And this is gonna be the percentage of my total operating expenses. Just gonna link it to operating expenses prior to transaction costs up here. And I'm gonna fix the row for this one by double pressing F4. Now I can copy it over to the side, and I can copy it down. And let's see, total operating expenses, 163,239, 163,239. And that's it. We now have our income statement all the way up to EBITDA. In the next video, we'll start working on our valuation assumptions. Thank you for watching another part of the course. As soon as the next video is uploaded, you'll find it right here. By the way, if you can spare a minute, I would love to hear your thoughts on the course and whether it's living up to your expectations. If you're watching on the website, you can do so by the feedback button up there. And if you're watching on YouTube, just drop a comment down below. Thank you.